So just a brief presentation before I start, because I know my job's a little unusual for this crowd. So I work as a senior data journalist for CBC News here in Toronto, and my job is essentially to find and analyze exclusive data that we can later use in stories we tell in our newsrooms, and to also collaborate with our investigative unit and shows like Fifth Estate and Marketplace to help them find data to bolster the stories that they're telling, whether it be daily news story or documentaries. And so in the past, I've used my data analysis skills to tell stories about nursing home violence, dangerous jails, and even to find Canada's worst parking spots using data analysis. Important topic. And so, will this work or will this not work? Okay, and one of the most interesting stories I worked on this year is a ticket scalping series. We started last winter with a small newsy story about how half of the tickets for a Maple Leafs hockey game had been scalped. And then it ended last month with a US class action and the Competition Bureau looking into Ticketmaster's so-called secret scalper program. And the company went public, vowing to crack down on scalpers and launching an internal review as to how it was that the majority of its stash of tickets for numerous events that we documented was in fact bought and resold by scalpers, while ordinary sports fans and music fans like all of you couldn't have access to affordable tickets. And so I just want to, because a lot of the data analysis I do has to be fit for television, I want to show you guys just a short clip of one of the TV stories that we did, so you get an idea of how we had to think about how this was going to look like, what this was going to look like on television, even before we started doing our back-end work. Okay, and maybe if I go there. And is there sound? There is no sound. Okay, well anyways, so if you keep, I just want to show you guys what it looked like, because it doesn't need sound for it. So essentially, here's what this looked like when we ended up taking it to air. So we had to find a way to show to our audience the fact that there was 46,000 tickets that were in the stadium, and then that we found 20,000 tickets that were up for resale. And then kind of introduce the fact that it was 45%. The lights that you see up are actually matching actual real seats that we were able to match up with the stadium map. So this is just an example. This is our reporter, Dave Sugland. So he was the one kind of taking the audience through our findings on camera. And then once that story, but way before that story rolled out, this investigation started with two men, actually. The first one, a lot of you know, it's Gord Downie from the Tragically Hip. In the summer of 2017, the band launched its final tour, and fans were very heartbroken that it was the last tour. But more than that, they became really pissed off because they realized that 2/3 of tickets for the tour actually had been bought by bots and scalpers. And that kind of led us to wonder, okay, how many times has this really happened in Canada? And then we met this guy. He kind of looks like an average college student, but actually this is Julien Lavallée. He's a super scalper. He's from Quebec. And he makes millions a year using bots to buy tickets and resell them via platforms like StubHub, the platform he co-created with other people. And we were wondering, okay, so if you are a scalper, how much money are we talking about here? And we found out through the Paradise Paper leak that actually for just one concert, this guy managed to make $52,000 in 25 minutes just by buying and presumably reselling ticket at a cost. So that's when we knew we really had a reason to spend lots of energy coding away and trying to figure out how many times does this happen in Canada, how much money are these scalpers making, and how big is scalping. When we were talking to scalpers, they were telling us maybe 10-15% of the stadium is scalped. Obviously, it's a lot more than that. So we thought, what if we track each ticket that's released at a primary box office like Ticketmaster, and then we count how many of these tickets end up on a resale site using a unique ID like the section, the row, and the seat. No matter what platform you go on to buy your ticket, there will always be the same basic information. Where will you be sitting, and how much will you be paying for that ticket? So we realized very quickly that even if the websites had different back-end structures, they had the same vital data that was at the crux of it that we could scrape. And so you see here, this is how we created our unique ticket ID. So no matter where a ticket went, whether it be on Ticketmaster or on any other resale platform, we could always tell if it was the same ticket that was bouncing between different markets, or if it was just one ticket, a different ticket that was going through different channels. So you see here, section 101. I know it's not exactly the same ID, but it would be S101, R05, S, whatever the seat is. And then the same thing here is we were able to capture both US dollars and Canadian dollars for the prices. And these are just chunks of our bigger database that we were building. And then we thought, okay, but once we have established what's the total estimate of tickets that are scalped, how do we know what percentage of the whole stadium that represents? So we're going to have to find a stadium map. And then we went to the source. We went to Ticketmaster and found a way using Python to scrape the map that was in the back end, so that, remember when you're kind of shopping for your own tickets, they show you where in the map. So we were able to find an SVG of that map and then extract the data tied to it. And then we would finally see how scalp tickets move. So let me take you guys through a little bit of it with Pythons. So we agreed on 4 different websites that we wanted to scrape. And then we chose Python for several reasons. I worked with a brilliant developer who unfortunately could not be here today, William Wolf-Wheely. He is a Python master. He's much better than I ever will be. But we both had Python knowledge, and so we decided that we would work with Python for it because it's his preferred language for scraping and creating bots. And then we found out very quickly that, as you all know, at the end of the URL, every event, every page has its own unique ID. So we pulled the unique IDs. You see here for Ticketmaster, for StubHub, for Tickets Now, SeatGeek. These are all IDs that we pulled. And then every day, our bots would iterate through the same page and just grab the same exact field. They would just kind of go grocery shopping and just grab all the items that we had pre-decided that they would grab, but they would do it several times a day at several different times. So we were capable of kind of seeing how tickets would circulate. So here you see the events ID that we inserted in a common URL structure, and then we gathered the raw JSON for each vendor's event. And then we were capable of channeling that in an API to feed data back and forth. And then it was a little bit trickier for Ticketmaster because they had 3 different databases. They had the map I told you about before, but they also had offers and listings. And so it was really important for us to grab as much as we could from Ticketmaster because we knew that the original price of a ticket would be our baseline to calculate markups when we later saw them on resale sites. And so you see here that we designed our own seat map, our own offer map, and our own listing map combined to create a custom dictionary of seats that later helped us to define the unique IDs. And then we also added vendors' data to the object to create a comprehensive view of how any single ticket moved through the marketplace. And then from that master seat structure, we actually were capable of extracting that and transforming it into a structured database. So at its height, this database had probably around 2 million rows of data in about 35 different fields. It can seem really confusing, but actually because we had this good idea of creating the unique IDs from the beginning, it was actually fairly easy to track down the tickets. And then, came the super fun part for me, which was cleaning and analyzing all the scalp data. So how do you do that when there's such a big monster involved? Well, you thank God for repeatable scripts, and then you create one that really works well. You make sure you repeat it very often, and you keep track of all your different iterations, and really make sure you stay super organized when you clean this stuff. So The more, yeah, and there was a purpose to this. I'm not just cleaning all this because I love clean stuff. I'm cleaning all this because the more accurate our stadium representation would be, we knew that the more tickets we clean, I knew in my head, even late at night and like hating this and drinking so much coffee, like that every single ticket that I would clean would later be an addition to that stadium map that I showed you guys at the beginning. So that's how we got the number from 0% to 46% is like painstakingly like kind of going through everything. And so what did like these horrible tickets look like? Like this is just an example here. So you have the stadium map. So the way we did it is William and I kind of sat with a huge stadium map, and I was just going through every single section. As a really quick sidebar, I don't know baseball or hockey. I don't follow them. I'd never stepped foot in those stadiums. I had no idea what was where. And it's a big lesson, a big takeaway from this for me is that you really need to have a lot of passion for your story, but also really kind of understand where you're going. You need to understand your subject matter so you make the right calls. So being two really helped for that. But you see here, there's OSIN. I had no idea what that meant. And then I realized after digging a little bit that there's a section called the Molson section that is sponsored. And so that's what it meant. And then, people like people like your auntie or like, yourself, when you're putting something online, sometimes you're kind of a little lax with the description. Well, then people like me have to clean it. It's not great. So you see here the face value and the total face value are missing. We actually created another Python script that would go back to Ticketmaster and kind of grab the face value initially. So that helped us fill in a lot of blanks when it came to markups. This is a little bit of how I kept my stuff. So I used SQL. It's the language I master best and I'm happy with. And it's a repeatable thing that you can annotate, so I was happy with it. And then you see here, these are all the different stories we've done. And then every single day, I would iterate through everything. And this is an example of, after doing the original hockey and baseball analysis, we kind of got ambitious and thought that we would do the 12 most popular concerts this summer. And so 12 concerts times 5 different pages meant, over, 60 different chunks that we had to keep track of. So it was a lot of this the whole summer. So we looked at stuff like Taylor Swift and Radiohead, and because we had the original face value, we could tell people where were the biggest markups, so which tickets were kind of scalped at the highest price, and what was going on in the scalper's mind when they think you're gonna want that Taylor Swift ticket more than a ticket for, say, Florence and the Machine. And so it helped us to kind of understand how that mechanic works and what tricks they use to get you to buy more and to buy at a bigger price. And so this was our weekly workflow. So we would use Python to do daily scrapes, to structure the data, to match stuff with their face value, to match with the stadium seat, as I said, the unique IDs. And then I did a lot of the bulk of the job in MySQL, a lot of batch cleaning, a lot of trend analysis, which sections were most scalped, which rows were most scalped, which events were most scalped, calculating markups, converting prices in US dollars on StubHub to Canadian dollars, and then exporting some nice little charts so that we could share with the rest of our team. This was a co-production with the Toronto Star. So we were a team of about 10 different journalists and producers, many of whom do not go into Excel or understand a lot about the data world. So I had to really make little Excel charts and share it in newsy terms with a headline and really transform that into a story that they could comprehend so they could then chase, and it could lead to a great TV story. And then it led us to thousands of scalp tickets. So these are just two GIFs that we created. What's interesting is William and I both knew that we wanted to do this from the start, so that's why we were so obsessed with matching the tickets. Every single little red light that you see is an actual real ticket that we matched to the actual real stadium map. So you can tell, okay, this is interesting. It's like a lot more on this side than it is on this side, and then a lot more here than it is here. So for people in Toronto specifically who knew hockey, who knew baseball, who've been in that stadium a countless amount of times, in those two stadiums and at different occasions, they were really interested in seeing this. Both these GIFs went viral online, And we put a lot of time and energy to make sure that it was self-contained. So you only had to share this and you could see what the story was immediately. Caveats. So, as you all know, a scraper can only scrape whatever it sees while it's scraping. We were not scraping 24/7 for the last year. Therefore, it might have not caught absolutely everything. So not all available tickets could be scraped. Not all scraped tickets could be matched. There are people that wrote such bad typos, I could never figure them out, and there's just nothing you can do about it. You know, the percentage of loss was really small overall, but it was still something we had to be honest about. Not all the face values were found. Scraping was sometimes interrupted. We set out a number of scrapers when the box office opened for each and every one of these events. And sometimes, because everyone was trying to access the server at the same time, created an overload and we got kicked out. So we had to try again and again. And there was one time where StubHub changed its page structure very, very slightly and subtly, and then it really ruined us for about 2 weeks. And we found out later, and then when I found out when I was creating my charts, because every week I would create charts to just make sure everything was running smoothly, and then there was a big hole. There was just nothing, and that did not make sense. So big life lesson here, you know, daily, ideally weekly monitoring of everything you're gathering. So I obviously did not do this alone. This is a labor of love from a lot of different people. I was part of a bigger team. William was my sidekick for this whole thing. He's a mastermind of this whole Python monster we created. And then we also had Jesse Wilms, who's another very talented developer who now works at the Globe and Mail, who helped us a little bit with the web scraping, because we had to have a lot of people running them from different places. Dave Seglens was the lead radio and television reporter, and then Rachel Houlihan was the radio and television producer. So that's it for me. I thought I would run like super long, so I guess if you guys have questions, I can take them. I thought I would like bust for sure. I guess it's that video.
And I think you do have takers on that one. I'm scalping that microphone.
So there could be a big impact to stories like this, right? And if you made mistakes in this, even if you were right but off by a small percentage, it could sort of hurt your credibility. How did you build your own confidence in the data that you were producing to know that it was accurate and reliable? And to what extent did you need to present others with proof that what you had done could be trusted?
So I think the first thing that we were very clear about in every single story we got out is, here's what we found. Here's what we did. Here's what we found. We found at least this many tickets. We were very clean and clear with our caveats. The other thing I should say too is I ran weekly monitoring operations to make sure that A, everything was running the way it should. B, everything was consistent, meaning the data that it brought back was always roughly the same volume, roughly looking the same. I also ran a lot of repeated cleans, and I made sure that the cleans were always exactly the same because my scripts were written in a way where they were repeatable. And I think another thing I calculated was data loss. So we knew exactly how many of the seats were in the stadium. We knew roughly based on weekly or daily analysis how many seats we were capturing every time we ran a scraper, and then we were capable of figuring out, you know, my general, I guess, the ceiling I'm comfortable with for data loss is like ideally less than 5%. But then if for stuff like this where you are building everything on the go and you have to create your own methodology, maybe like 10%, but nothing upwards of that. The other thing I should say is that in addition to doing this, we also sought a lot of other sources, human sources, to confirm what we were finding, to kind of try to give us an idea of whether or not what we were seeing behind the screen was true. And so that also implied that we had to deliver on the data analysis very early on in the story so that there could be that back and forth with the journalists who had been this whole time on the ground, try to get a sense from the scalper and from the music lover, music artists and agent community of what was going on.
Hi, two questions. First of all, is the code for the web scraping publicly available, and is it still maintained?
It is not publicly available, and as of recently, the scalping, ticket scalping operations are shut down. Not because we had to, but just because we felt like the story had run its course, and we kind of exploited all the possible stories we had done. As of late, Dave Seglins and his producer are now doing a lot of hidden camera work, trying to infiltrate the world of scalpers to see what other ways that are not technological they're using to kind of control the market.
And second question, how did you go about mapping the seeds to the SVG map? Did you have to manually map the vectors to the SVG map, or?
So that's something that Will did mostly. I would love for him to be there. Actually, we pitched this together, but then something came up. So if you want, I can give you his Twitter handle, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer. Is there anyone else? Yeah.
So, scraping question, did Ticketmaster or any of the other sites have any anti-scraping clauses in their terms of use? And if so, how did you justify breaking them? And were there any legal threats or repercussions because of it?
Yeah, so that's really interesting, because for us at CBC, we have rules that are really strict when it comes to a lot of different things. Whether or not we can, agree to film someone and not show their face. Whether or not we can infiltrate a certain Facebook group using another identity. So I was actually part of the group who reviewed our journalistic standard and practices a couple years ago, and we discussed scraping extensively. There was a big discussion. There were people like me and Dave and William and a lot of data journalists who work in Canada who believe that data is public. And if a website is online and it is public and it does not have a clear lock on it, then it should be public information and available to everyone. What I can say on the way we did this is we did not break any locks. We did not violate any terms of use, because that's just not, CBC would not stand for this. However, our general policy is when we first start scraping, we don't conceal our identity the same way you would in life. If I knock on someone's door and I want an interview, I'm going to present myself, introduce myself, say I'm a journalist. Our scripts say the exact same thing. We're journalists, we're going on your website, here's what we're doing. So we're really clear in our signature, this is what we're going for. If you have a problem, kind of contact us. So that's the typical boilerplate answer. What we would do in some cases, if we're doing investigative work and we can explain that the public interest of the data weighs more than the possibility is more, the data is so important that we're going to go get, that we could potentially consider concealing both either a virtual or a real life reality identity, then we could do it. So in that sense, the way our rules are made at CBC, we do have an option, but that has to be vetted by the very, very highest powers that be at CBC. So we essentially have to go to the biggest boss that there is and kind of make a case to say, hey, we're doing this story, and we think that maybe virtually concealing our identity, so not always have this stuff coming from the same IP address, for example, would be a way for us to get this information. And here are all the reasons from our previous stories and our investigating that lead us to believe that the information we need is that important. So I don't know if it clarifies for you. Yeah, so the bar is a little bit higher. This is essentially what I want to say about this. But for us, for the whole team, we just had a sense that it was totally worth it, that people needed to know this. And I think we were right.
Yep. So thank you very much for that presentation. I found it fascinating.